Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello and welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. Today my guests are Dr. Michael Alce and Mark O'Connell. Michael is a clinical psychologist and a mental health educator at the Manhattan School of Music. He's also the author of the new or newish book, Therapeutic Improvisation, How to Stop Winging It and Own It as a Therapist, available from Norton Press. Mark O'Connell is a licensed clinical social worker and an actor. Mark is the author of Modern Brides and Modern Grooms. He's also the author of The Performing Art of Therapy, available from Routledge Press. Today, they will be discussing those ideas within those books and their upcoming workshop at the 2023 Psychotherapy Networker Symposium, Improv and Creativity in the Therapy Room, How to Show Up for Your Clients and Make Therapy Sing. Michael and Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Scott.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciated having you on last year, both of you. I had Mark on a couple times. Michael, you had you on right before your book was coming out or when it was coming out. These are groundbreaking in some ways, but I think they're affirming ideas for the art of psychotherapy, right? I mean, we had about 20 years of pushing back into the science of psychotherapy, outcome studies, brain studies, et cetera. Not that those are not applicable, but like when you're doing the process of psychotherapy, I feel as a former actor and artist and musician that what makes me work best when I'm in the consulting room is tapping into flow states and trying to get into the groove of the person or the personality in front of me, make them feel accepted and have a place to be creative and kind of expand and be flexible in their ideas and their sense of self. So with that said, maybe you can introduce yourself in the symposium that you're going to be doing, this performance, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, it's an opportunity to just meet up with other therapists live in person, and it's awesome that we get to do it together. But a lot of therapists haven't taken a live workshop in like years, maybe 4 years or something. And so just being together is going to be incredibly exciting. And like you're saying, Scott, I mean, we're really just addressing what it is that we all do, no matter what kind of therapist we are. We're just sort of addressing that. I think that's particularly important right now. Now that the frame's been busted open and everyone recognizes, hey, we're exposed. We're just doing the same thing. We have a scene partner. We're trying to make them feel as alive as possible. And a lot of therapists are already doing improv and they don't realize it. So our job is basically to, increase their awareness of what they're already doing, help them maximize their creativity in doing it, and trust themselves and take care of their instrument at the same time. And it's going to be a lot of fun, I hope. I think, and hope.
Yeah. And the funny thing is actually, Mark, if we look at ourselves too, right? Like we've been sort of playing together over Zoom for the past year or two. And it feels like we've been in the recording studio on different coasts, even though we probably live like 20 miles away from each other.
Yeah.
And so the exciting part, I think, for us is, and for everybody coming to the conference, is to be together because the energy of collaborating creatively is, like you said, Scott, getting into the groove, getting into the flow. That's the real engine. That's the real heart of therapy. And so one of the things we are both excited about sharing is something that we all love about therapy. I think it's one of the reasons that so many people come to the Networker Conference, because the Networker Conference is this wonderful place which both respects the science of psychotherapy, but embraces the art and sees the synergy of the two. And I think one of the cool things about it is that we want to kind of get into this kind of killer collaboration. Like I joke with Mark that because my background is music and literature. And I think that one of the reasons we love doing therapy so much is because we're excited about, how can I collaborate with this client today? What is the unique mashup that we're going to make? And how am I going to surprise myself? And how are they going to surprise themselves? And so the funny thing about this creativity, it's not only good for outcome, but we know how many therapists, including ourselves, have been burnt out or overloaded by how much we've been doing. And so this sense of improvisation is what keeps us not only tuned, it keeps us really feeling good and trading that energy back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so you have been, it sounds like you've been doing some online workshops together. Is that right? Or you've just been hanging out and talking?
Well, he means conversation, and he used the word, but you said recording studio. I hope you haven't been recording everything, Michael.
Actually, I've got some great tracks that Mark put down that's going to be in an unreleased album right now. No, nothing.
I think.
I don't think that's legal. Maybe it is in New York. I don't know.
New York State it is, but no, we're fine.
The bootleg, you'll have the Grateful Dead collection version. Of the unauthorized tapes.
Yeah,
people.
We've been talking. Yeah. We've been talking. I think ever since your book came out, Michael. Right? Like you reached out to me, and we. Yeah,
we did a sort of to celebrate the release of the book. Mark and I did an Instagram live kind of back and forth where we just discovered how much, and we were just riffing together. We had not really planned anything. But as we were talking, Mark's extraordinary background in acting, and then my background in music and literature. And it turns out we love some of the same films as well, and some of the same actors and actresses. We just found this kind of this synergy and this kind of consilience between the different ways that we were approaching things. And every time we talked, to me, it felt like we were practicing to lay down an album together. And, and one of the things that I really love about creativity and therapy is it's like, I think you should go into therapy. Like Mark says, Mark brings something cool. He thinks of when you go into therapy, it's like you're trying to work with who's my scene partner and how can I make this scene work and find something new within the character and how can I support them and their character to bring out more aspects of the scene so that we become like the best ensemble cast, right? Is that fair to say, Mark?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then my also take is that when we're going in there, we're like trying to figure out, okay, how can I figure out what their music is, what their style is, and how can I kind of pair it along with mine? And how can we find a good mix that let's say Quincy Jones might put together,
Okay. Wow. Okay. So you guide yourself with the general metaphor of scene partner or improvisational musician partners.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's the metaphor that leads you. And I mean, I'm curious because sometimes, sometimes during the pandemic, especially, trying to balance the ins and outs, the day-to-day kind of drudgery of, because it's not all sexy what we do, right? It's not it's a lot of it's like case notes or having to use CPT codes if you do billing, or
that's the worst.
Running credit cards.
That's all I remember.
Yeah. And you have to put that aside and walk in. And is it I always tell people when I'm supervising, try to set the intention for the day. So do you find yourself having to go back to that as kind of Sue Johnson talks about the framework of the therapy, EFT or whatever you're using is kind of the holding environment. But as for you to kind of not feel frazzled in a couples therapy, because she does mostly couples therapy, but can you use it as a holding environment, if you will, or an intention setting so that you show up in that self state or that ego state?
And I think what you're kind of leading us to, Scott, is that there's lots of different variations on how we think about improv and what that even means. And what's so great about the workshop is that it's basically two workshops in one, really, because we're each leading a section, because we enter the conversation actually at different points because we're different people. But I think what's exciting is people will see that the themes from the helicopter view are largely the same, that, it's about creating an invitation for this person to to what did Winnicott call it? The spontaneous gesture, to show up as authentically as possible, to embody as much as themselves as possible. And particularly with therapy, people are there to embody parts of themselves they don't ordinarily connect with, that are so painful or traumatic or unpleasant in some way. To your point, Scott, about how often it's actually quite difficult what we do. And so for my section, I'm going to be focused more on like the slower kind of long form improv of what we do. And thinking about where each of us begins. So we're going to do some, what I call is preparing to be unprepared. So we'll do some breathing. We'll do some, just how to sit, basically energy workshop on the body and stuff like that. Basically to slow down and think about, yes, the framework, like where are we beginning, and what's happening with me, like that. When we think of the rule of improv of yes, having to say yes, and you have to say yes to yourself first. So we're thinking about sort of like what's happening with me and how can I use that to begin to invite this person to show up however long it takes, however they need to show up. And the last thing I'll say about that is I always begin with, when I teach a workshop, with a video of Viola Davis winning her Oscar, because she says, I became an artist, and thank God I did, because we are the only profession that celebrates what it means to live a life. And she says it with such passion. And she's talking about connecting to trauma and pain and the unsung aspects of what it is to be human. So when we're talking about improv, we're also talking about just the long silences. And in those long silences, we are still inviting an openness. And again, that can take years for the client to then receive that invitation and say, yes, and, but, in any case. And so then, Michael will have his side of it too, because it's very often it can also be helpful and holding to have more of a riff that is more obvious and more verbal and more fun even. We're going to be addressing variations on what improv means, if that makes sense.
I just want to wax poetic about Mark for a moment. This is why I love collaborating with him, because Mark, tell me if this resonates for you. When I listen to what Mark's going to be doing in this beginning, it's almost teaching about how psychotherapy meditation works. In other words, how being receptive to the instrument, which is exactly what a good actor does. The instrument is the body and the heart and the soul, and being receptive to it and all of it, including the difficult, especially the difficult. But that's a long game of really trusting and really kind of getting into a sort of dropping in place where there's a receptivity and a presence, right? That's the therapeutic presence that I'll talk about as well, that we talk about together. But that's the central place. And it's learning, like you said, to trust yourself and love yourself more fully and have more compassion for those parts of self, so that we can have greater compassion for every self, every range of character that walks in our door. And coming from that place is so powerful and so, like meditation, so profoundly simple and elegant and difficult at the same time. But when done together, it's like so refreshing. And I think, what I love about it is that I think it is the essence. And it's also what we see the neurobiology connects to it, is exactly what Freud was talking about evenly hovering attention, allowing ourselves to just be with everything. It's a lot of what all the body-centered therapists now are saying, trusting your body more, right? We've really realigned the body and the mind and the body and the brain together. And I think this is the way to do it. Which I think is really, it's everything that Rogers was talking about too, by the way, of really being unconditionally accepting and open and authentic. And it's also like, you brought up Viola Davis. I joke with Mark all the time that this is teaching us as therapists how to have as much range as Meryl Streep. And when we can do that personally and professionally, that's why Meryl Streep can take on any role. That's why she's never scared. She's always intrigued about which new role. And we want every therapist to be excited about which role they're going to be playing and which new scene partner they're going to be working with, and to get delighted in not only knowing where it's going to go, but how it's going to unfold.
Mm-hmm. Even if it's painful. And that's exactly right. I mean, we really do share this sense of wanting to enliven therapists. We believe therapists are artists, and we really want to enliven people, and we're advocating for that. Again, even with the difficult parts that are exhausting and that burn us out, to think about it the way a great actor would think about it, where you really get impassioned to dive into all that it means to be human. And there's an energy to be found in approaching the work that way.
And I want to share a riff based on that, Mark and Scott. There's this great scene that from Mark, what's that movie, Fences, with Denzel Washington?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And there's that pivotal scene, the Academy Award-winning scene, when Viola Davis' character says, I've been standing here in the same space waiting for you for 18 years, Troy.
Yeah.
But in that moment, even though it's a moment of trauma where she is heartbroken, despair of waiting for a husband who is embittered, who is narcissistic, who is charismatic, but she sees his promise, but she sees his brokenness. And in this beautiful monologue, she not only shows us that her soul, she shows us his soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the point is that if we can get to the dark places and find the beauty and find the art together, that's what our clients are waiting for. They're waiting for someone to be truly present, as if these lines matter.
I was going to say they're waiting for Godot. No, they're not waiting for Godot.
They are in a way.
We're all waiting for Godot.
We're all waiting for Godot. And that's what's so funny. We're waiting for the human encounter to remind us that we're not alone, despite the places that we feel broken and fragmented and hopeful and wishing that somehow we can bring together this crazy mess that is heartbreakingly beautiful life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The recognition.
Yeah. And I think that's what people are craving, a kind of sense of putting it all together so they can make sense of their lives and have meaning and open themselves up to acceptance and kindness for themselves and others, and responsibility through acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, as a preview, Scott, what I'm going to be doing in the second half to, really kind of add on to what Mark is doing is I'm going to build on that and say, okay, now that we've got the instrument prepared, now that we're trusting, getting to, notice what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and not censoring it and being with it. Now let's notice what it's like to read the changes when things are coming fast at us, just like a musician, and we've got to try and solo on it. And what you're taking in from the client and how you're working with all that stuff in you and using that to play the changes and make new variations on the melody together. And I'll do some examples from John Coltrane and McCoy Tyner, just to show what it sounds like, because the feeling is brilliant. And this is one of the reasons why when you go to a jazz club and you hear these people, you're moved, not just because the music is interesting, but because the feeling territory that they traversed is so wide and diverse. Mm-hmm. And, we talk a lot about diversity on the outside. We sometimes don't talk about how diverse we are inside. We're all so diverse inside in terms of these different thoughts and feelings that move. And you know how it's like to live a life from moment to moment. You're like, wait, how did I go from this to that within the hour? So we're also celebrating learning the art of therapy so that people can really deepen their celebration of diversity from the inside out as well as the outside in.
So it sounds like the first half, just so that the kind of solidify this a little bit more for the audience, should they decide to participate. It sounds like the first half is preparation and self-attunement, and the second half is action and other attunement.
Yeah, right? That's right.
Yeah, I think particularly because Michael, again, as he mentioned that, the musical connection is so apparent, it's so palpable in the way that he approaches the work and talks about it. And it's apparent in his book too. His book reads like, a piece of jazz music. And so that's one of the things that he is very skilled at and very talented at. It's contagious to hear him talk about the moment to moment adjustments and that flow. And so that's, he's going to be emphasizing that because that is a huge part of what we do in the present moment. And thinking of it in terms of music, I think is a really exciting way to think about it.
And Scott, you know what? It's interesting about what you said too. I noticed is that, yeah, that's totally right. We're going to attune to self and then we're going to attune to others. And then when you're reading the changes, it's actually funny. You're actually toggling back and forth to yourself and the others all the time. And so, you know, that's sort of even what we do in this interview. We're like tuning to ourselves, we're tuning to each other, going back and forth. And creative collaboration works like that because I was telling someone, I don't know where I found this definition of creativity. I don't know if I stole it. Most likely I stole it or made it up. But I consider creativity the art of changing while staying the same.
I like that.
Right. It's not easy to change while staying the same and to be in that paradox. And so by the end of our program, we're hoping that you're not just going to be tuned into yourself and other, you're going to be tuned into your other and the self and back and forth and left and right. And again, it is a left brain, right brain thing because some part of it.
Say you've mentioned before, it's right brain communication that you're kind of doing in therapy, right? I mean, you are going back and forth, but like, and even right here with the two of you, this is a good example, and myself kind of being here as well. We're doing a lot of right brain communication, I think, and going back and forth between these so-called lobes of the brain, right? But there's also the idea of like holding space for the person to be able to do that, right? Setting the tone.
And I want to speak to that too, because the first part, I wouldn't say exclusively is not exclusively on the self. I would just, the way I would put it is that it's another way, giving them another way of looking at it so that they don't necessarily, some people's personalities, mine included, we don't begin with a sort of like a more immediate extroverted sort of back and forth, you know. But that doesn't mean that in silence, even that there isn't something happening that's very dynamic and very much an invitation and very much creating an atmosphere and a holding environment, to your point. So I'm going to be giving some examples for people of how we are incredibly other focused, even when we're thinking about ourselves. So like Michael's saying about toggling back and forth, I'm going to be showing people, I hope I'm even giving a clinical example of what can happen in silence, subtextually, just by an example from my work, just by showing up, you know, just in the way that you think about how you're exposing yourself, not saying anything. Just think about, like, the example I'm giving has to do with a client that I was afraid would be homophobic, for example. And the difference in opening something up with him was simply to stop thinking I needed to hide something. And so, you know, just that thought alone changed, well, it probably changed a lot of practical things too, the way I was breathing, the way I was holding myself energetically, you know. And so I want to, that's what I'm, you know, so an example of what I'm saying, that it's not that
it's interconnected.
It's interconnected. Right.
And you know what? I think it's so funny. I think, Scott, you've honed in on something really fascinating about this stuff, which it's like saying, is light a wave or a particle? It's both. Yeah. There's no way to be just focusing on tuning yourself without tuning on the other. And that's the beauty of what it is to be human. And that's one of the reasons why therapy works so well. That's the reason why we work so well in relationship, because we can't be a self in isolation anyway. And to know ourselves is to know others, and to know others is to know ourselves. So really, when we're talking about others, we're talking about ourselves, and vice versa. So it's really what we're trying to do is to get people to sort of live and work in the paradox, and to embrace that, and to embrace the science of it. And the funny thing is, you were saying too, Scott, which I totally agree. We're doing a lot of right brain stuff here today as we talk, but we also forget that, I mean, the right brain is really, really good, supposedly, at, you know, emotional tone and prosody and metaphor and image. And it has some language. It does have some language capacity, but the capacity that we're using to verbally put this into form and create discrete, discriminating segments, that's all left brain. And so we are really trying to showcase that, you know, we want to privilege more of the right brain because it has a wealth of information, a wealth of data, if you will, that really is going to round out what our left brain tells us, but our left brain is going to be the mouthpiece for it. But we got to give it the right raw material. That it's almost like, you know, what I loved about Titanic is that it was an epic film. What I didn't love is you gave these great actors, no offense to anybody who loves it, Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, terrible lines. Right? Right?
Oh gosh, we're talking about it. Okay.
I went there. I mean, it's different.
I think there's a lot of films like that, and there's ways to cover things up.
But it's only because you have great actors who could cover for that. But
or filmmakers that can like razzle dazzle you. I think another one is Dark Knight. Have you actually read the dialogue, or like if you could turn down Howard Shore's? I think it was not Howard Shore, Hans Zimmer's score.
Oh yeah,
blasting. You can hardly, and it's a Chris Nolan movie, so he mics everybody live, and he doesn't do any overdubs, so you can't hear the dialogue, which was okay. And of course, Heath Ledger made that film what it was. Again, another example of like, bad dialogue if you actually sat there, right? But it's the actors who make it. It's the direction. It's like, it's not the dialogue you're looking at. It's
exactly. This is a good segue into one of the bits. Yeah, exactly. That one of the bits that I want to show is I want to show people a few different scenes. I do it sometimes in my workshops of great actors playing therapists. And what's interesting I want them to see exactly what you're talking about. What's happening between the scene partners in a context that the therapist is familiar with great actors who are using their subtext and who are being very improvisational just, by listening and to great result. But what's interesting is that people often first, when they give feedback, talk about the dialogue. They talk about, and so we have to break it down and say, no. This is not a real person. This is not a real therapist. A writer wrote those lines. What I want you to see is what that actor is doing to invite something in their scene partner. I want you to pay attention to that, and that you can be inspired by and recognize, I have the capacity to bring myself just by sitting there and breathing and listening to do something very similar.
And a lot of those great lines, Mark, like you're saying, are also going on internally for most of us therapists. We're not having that great, Gabriel Byrne moment in treatment or Rob Williams in Good Will Hunting saying, okay, chief, your move, but inside we're thinking, okay, this kid is challenging me because he's hurting and he's trying to throw me into his hurt. Okay, your move. I figured out your game, but we're not saying it.
Right.
But the cool thing is, and this is something I think is nice as a sort of, because I think sometimes, therapy, like you said, Scott, it can have its tedious moments, right? It can have its difficulties, its unglamorousness. But I think when you think like this, you still imagine yourself in a film, in a scene with somebody, and then all of a sudden makes these seemingly mundane, particularly difficult moments fascinating, which is why we go to drama, right? Why we go, because why would we want to watch strife and difficulty and heartbreak in front of us unless we can see how it's done beautifully in a way that we've never thought of quite before?
That's right. And transformative possibility of what it can mean to be alive.
Yeah.
And who's a big proponent of what you're describing, Michael, that kind of acting in the work is ironically Judith Beck. And probably a lot of other people. Yeah. She would not use that word, I bet. I hope she's listening. But
I almost fell off my seat, Mark.
I know. But if you read her book, what she's describing, she doesn't even realize, I don't think, that she's talking about acting and screen acting in particular. But she talks about the tone of voice, the subtext, the most important thing, she says, is how you are delivering these interventions. And to your point, Michael, she gives you a list of suggested lines you could be thinking while you are.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Well, have either of you seen her in workshops or on video?
I have not.
I remember watching her in a CBT class in grad school, right?
I remember that too. Yeah.
And it was like, she, like in this particular APA approved video, like she's with the person in the first session and she's hovering in there with attention, right? Like a interpersonal or a Rogerian. She's absolutely not. And afterwards in the breakdown, she's talking to, the people running this particular, show that was taped somewhere here in Chicago or the Chicagoland area years ago. She was like, they were like, well, what happened? Where were the techniques? I didn't see any downward arrows. I didn't see any cognitive distortions. But she said, I was just trying to establish the rapport. I couldn't do this in this session. this is all just about the rapport and the real basics of psychotherapy. Like I couldn't use those interventions. And it's interesting that you're talking about that, Mark, about like how she's using these acting ideas, because many people who are trained in CBT, they go right for those corny lines. And
very, very scripted lines too, right?
Very scripted and
soap opera acting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ouch.
Well, and remember that used to be what
that's a hard job. Come on. I mean, like people on soaps are like,
I have respect for a lot of
work a lot. They work hard.
Respect for all therapists too, and all actors. I'm just saying.
But CBT doesn't have to be that way. And,
it doesn't.
And the people
and
who
remember, analysis of old used to do have the same tick where it say, how does that make you feel? Yep. Right. So totally. We are equal opportunity with looking at how this works and doesn't work. And I think the cool thing that you're pointing out too, Scott, is that this could happen in unexpected places, because when you're doing this stuff, you really are truly being integrative, and you truly are not worrying. As Duke Ellington said, the best music is beyond category.
I think therapy happens. Therapeutic moments happen in spite of myself most of the time.
Of course they do.
In spite of the things I think make it happen.
Well, everybody comes to that conclusion. Winnicott at the end of his life said, and I'm not going to quote him exactly, but he basically said that he regretted all the times he was trying things or trying to do something that was going to satisfy him, when really he just needed to sit back and let the person heal. And Bessel van der Kolk says pretty much the same thing.
We all want our cookies, right? Yeah, we want our cookies. Yes. Come on, cookies are good.
Of course. Well, we need to, and that's the thing, and that's also what I want to bring up. It's okay to want cookies. It gets us in the room. We have to have drive, but it's a matter of paying attention to what happens in those scenes so that we can adjust, to Michael's point, to better let the other person sort of be present and be alive. So. You just pay attention to what's happening. There's no perfect way to do this. It's just about entering that process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned Winnicott. I guess both of you have been trained more formally or informally in School of Hard Knocks and relational kind of therapies. Maybe you can kind of discuss that.
I'm interested in relational work. I after social work school, having been to drama school, I didn't want to go to another institution to learn a craft like this. And I just didn't. I wanted to be independently thinking as I was learning, and not sort of kind of an empty vessel. And so I just found supervisors based on the writing I liked, and I ended up with relational people, mostly not even knowing what those terms meant, because I think they're the most kind of artistic of the writers of the work, at least, not necessarily in practice. I'm not going to name any names, but that's not what this is about.
I've already told my Titanic thing, so we've already pissed off James Cameron, so
and Christopher Nolan,
so
and
we're already canceled right there. Mark, don't add to
it. They work hard, man. I tell you,
they do. I know. But yeah, I have a foot in the relational world. I have a lot of contacts there, and I kind of teach in sort of workshops here and there. But I really love what they're up to in terms of how they talk about it, at least.
I think you're right. I think that Nancy McWilliams and Jonathan Shedler are two people who are infinitely readable and understandable. And they're like, it's easy to find out how the process works, right? They talk about the why, but they also I think those two are very good at, I think as psychodynamic kind of therapies rolled out, they got the idea of more so what the spaces you're creating and the how. And I think that they they're more of a gestalt, if not, no pun intended, kind of look at how people work, but
also the ambivalences too. Like if you think Jessica Benjamin talking about the contrast and the disagreements in the third space, that transitional space Winnicott talked about, and that's why, again, that we Michael and I are as you can tell, have a lot of similarity, a lot of, rapport that is based on a kinship. But also there are things we like to emphasize differently. So again, having the two sections, I think is a nod in a way to Jessica Benjamin about showing that to be, coexisting and finding potential means also, recognizing difference and different points of view. So that's another way of kind of showing without telling people how that works.
Well, and I think, Mark, you're hitting on something too that I really resonate with is I think always creativity is about playing the polarities of two things that become a mysterious third. Mm-hmm. And so one of the reasons I've always loved Winnicott is because even though he really was psychoanalytic, he rebelled and subverted psychoanalysis in lots of ways and was really privileging not only attachment and relationship, but creativity in a way that was not pathological. He was saying creativity is the essence of becoming, not the sublimation of the id, which was revolutionary. And the other thing, I've always loved people who take on different perspectives. Like I love Paul Wachtel because he looks at how dynamic work and CBT can really work together and are doing a lot of the same things, sometimes more implicitly, sometimes more explicitly. And for me, I love this back and forth and, even the left brain, right brain. I think we are built in these kind of polarities that are trying to complement while they're antagonizing. I even think the history of psychotherapy, as I've talked about with you both, I think the history of psychotherapy has always waffled back and forth between being more directive and being more non-directive. And instead of just recognizing, hey, we are a square peg in a round hole and we're never going to resolve that. We have to work with that. And so to me, one of the reasons that I'm excited for this talk for others to see is that I want the people who are doing CBT, DBT, ACT, AEDP, every acronym out there to say, this really connects to what I'm doing. And this also has something a little bit different, but that helps me look at what I'm doing in a new way, or this helps me incorporate something that I didn't think I was doing. Oh, it turns out I'm Judith Beck and I'm doing some Rogerian stuff. Who knew? And so I think also the discovery is also the meta process of looking at how this work comes together in an organic way. And to me, that is the process that our job is to teach people how to process the process.
I think academically, at least from my experience of academic training, where there's such an adherence to the science, right? But they don't talk about you're lucky. I mean, I was formally trained in hypnosis and CBT, and I was lucky that most of my supervisors were self-psychologists. They were cohesion, or they were trained in some kind of psychodynamic conceptualization, and I lucked out because that put the two pieces, the more kind of like technique-y kind of ways of doing things into the holistic picture of a person and me sitting with them, so I lucked out. But I think largely there's a lack of this kind of training that you're talking about here, that you're doing in the symposium. And you're kind of like, there needs to be more of this emphasis on the how of psychotherapy, including.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, and important.
I want to even lead by telling people not to. I think I even put a note in. They make you submit worksheets. People like to have worksheets with something to hold on to, of course. So which is great. Takeaways. I have lots of references. I give them all the links to everything that they can look at it, look it up afterward. But I really want to encourage people to have an experience while they're there, and to really think about themselves present in the room, and not so much of this kind of just intellectual sort of empty vessel student trying to focus really hard on learning something intellectual, but really allowing themselves to have a process and knowing that it's balanced out by, yes, there's plenty that you can read to ground this in a context.
Well, to think about it, like you're trying to help people become their own secure base so they can be a secure base with their patients.
That's a great way of putting it. I like that a lot.
I love that. I think that's a great image of being a secure base. And what's funny too about the artistic thing is I always found, I don't know if you guys found this, but in grad school and beyond, I found myself always drawn to reading fiction and other things to complement what I felt was missing. And, I read Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, or, or I'd read a kind of seemingly unconventional therapeutic approach that did incorporate more of this stuff. Or I try to find ways of seeing the psychology in movies, because, Mark knows that I love movies and sharing movie clips, which I probably will do at this talk, which I think is really fun. But I think that to me was really extraordinary to learn that I learned as much about psychology and psychotherapy from my Shakespeare class in college, right? Or from even being a musician or loving poetry. As both you guys know, I love poetry, and, I love spewing out poetic lines because I think the funny thing is, and I remember when we talked about this last time, when I told Yalom that I was so thankful and appreciative that I thought he really paved the way for us therapists to really own this artistry, and he demurred, I was like, oh my gosh. But I think the cool thing about it, and like, this is something that Mark and I are going to talk about, like outside, right in the front and center of our talk, is that the irony is those people who are super shrinks, who are making outcomes 10 times better than their other therapist peers, are responsive because they're doing all these artistic things with engineering precision.
Yeah. Well, this is amazing stuff. I looked at the time. You've got like 2.5 hours for this, an hour and a half. Is it an hour and a half workshop you have?
Each one will be 2.5 hours. So
how many of them you're doing?
No. Oh, I'm sorry. The whole thing will be 5 hours. So
5 hours. I was going to say
2.5 hours each to lead.
Okay. That's good. That's good. I mean, you could make this a weekend workshop if you could roll this thing out you could take the show on the road, guys.
Well, I hope the conversation continues. That's one of the reasons when Michael first reached out to me and I read his book, and I was like, oh, this is someone who also shares a passion of very specifically advocating for therapists as artists, not as some kind of fancy thing to think about, but as all the things we're talking about, and how essential it is to focus on what we're actually doing and what actually matters between us, between us and the individual person in the room. And I don't think I want to give up on that conversation and being loud about it until the day when I'm audited by an insurance company and the person says, well, what did you do with the client? And I say, oh, we played. I got him to play. And the person responds to me and says, well done, sir. You are covered. These services will be covered for as long as you need. That is when I will give up.
I think there might be an auditor out there who might just say, yeah, I think I give up.
I haven't met that person yet. You know what, Scott? They are all Jamie Lee Curtis's character in Everything Everywhere All at Once, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, actually, I think by the end, she even comes around, doesn't she? Now that I think about it. So they're not her. They should be her.
But you're right. I think
I just realized you're right. That was Jamie Lee Curtis. Wow.
Yeah. We're learning a lot of new things here, folks.
Wow. Yeah. That was the biggest thing I learned. Cause wait, who was she? Oh my God.
Yeah. This was amazing. Wow.
Yeah. No, it's a great movie.
So we definitely are hoping to plan. I mean, I didn't get the tour shirts ready. But Mark and I are definitely planning. I think we're going to have fun with this. And I think you're right. I think there's something really, really important about this stuff. We think it's there, though. I mean, the other thing is it's so much like that Molière quote, like to think I've been speaking prose all my life and I didn't realize it. Like all therapists everywhere are artists and doing artists. But the other thing that we really are excited about to share is that we also want to blow the door open on what we look at as mental health. Mm-hmm. Like mental health, psychological life is creative life. Mm-hmm. And that creative life is the center of everything we do, whether you're an artist or a businessman or something else. But being connected to that is the art of all arts. It is the core of being an artist in anything. And so we also want to expand the notion, like, Nancy McWilliams is doing too, because Nancy McWilliams looked at the Damn Stupid Manual and said, wait, what does this teach us about why we're living? Why? Exactly. And not only, and how? And so we want to say, like, there's more that we actually know and we all do that can expand how we think about mental health for the general public.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, it's a really enriching view that gets, obviously we want to appreciate what we know about our categorization, our pathology, and what we can do with that. But we also want to see what broadly do we know about the human condition?
Yeah.
The human condition is an art.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, if you look at the history, some of the big movers and shakers, so to speak, from Vienna, right? You had Freud, and then someone disagreed with him, and Jung took off and did his own thing. And I think he's looking more at that holistic thing in the form of mandala, or a positioning of opposites, and coming up with like that was it the union conjunctus, right? The whole idea of like marriage of opposites, or the alchemical wedding as a metaphor, and an alchemical process of therapy. And then Adler said that people were goal-directed
social beings who had social interests.
Social beings, and social interest is super important. But also, one of his students and friends and colleagues who got kicked out of his coffee shop in Vienna was Viktor Frankl, who said meaning. But I think creativity is a huge chunk of that. I think meaning is important. I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking for something bigger than themselves, and feeling that they have locus of control and agency within themselves. That's flow. That's creativity.
And very simply too, just Harry Stack Sullivan, and we are all more human than otherwise, simply. And then just the question of what does that mean, and the quest for having that experience, which is, inevitably has to be a creative pursuit.
Yeah.
It requires imagination to get to parts of yourself that you haven't been to before.
Well, I think,
it requires you also to allow yourself to lose yourself temporarily to find yourself.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that you could easily just record yourselves talking and put it up somewhere as a podcast, and people would probably listen, and you wouldn't have to have guests. You could have guests. Right? I mean, you could do that, but I think you could be each other's guests, or you could come up with an idea. You could have a limited series. I think it would be, you should do that. I think that's
all three of us. Why don't we all three of us do it?
Yeah.
Now that you're suggesting it.
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we do that? Well,
why don't we do that? I think we got a new spin-off series. Oh, look at this.
Yeah. I think we just, if you really are interested in doing that, let's do that.
Let's do it.
Okay.
I'm game.
And, we can.
Jamie Lee Curtis, look out. We're coming for you.
Seriously, contact me about that. We'll keep in contact with each other about that. But also your idea of like this kind of like systemic, how do we fix society? And I think creativity is one way to do that. It's probably a huge chunk of what's missing. Meaning and creativity. Yeah.
And I think, what was great is how you summarized it beautifully with Freud, Jung, and Adler. Almost you see all elements of trying to bring it all together. Community, environment,
different
self.
pieces of the pie. Yeah.
All of it together. And so what's cool is we had the originators of our field really saw a lot of the full vision.
Yeah.
We're trying to put that together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we should probably wrap up, because I know that, Michael, you have somebody to go see and talk to.
Yeah, but this was great, gentlemen. This is the best way of spending a Friday, man.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
I would agree. I think my weekends.
Thank you, Scott, for amplifying this important message.
So now you got to think of the title for our Netflix limited series, Scott.
Yes.
3 people and a mic.
Yeah.
Or three mics and 3 people, or something.
Yeah, 3 mics and 3 people. Yeah.
Wait, I have to plug in case anyone is listening and wants to register for the symposium, not even necessarily our workshop. Use the discount code capital SYM as in symposium, 50 as in $50, which you get off if you do use the code. So SIM50, and you can just Google Psychotherapy Network or Symposium.
And one little other bonus, by the way, folks, spring is coming early to Washington, D.C., and it looks like the cherry blossoms will be blooming by the time we are there.
And when is this taking place? When can people meet you in person?
March 16th. Right? Yes.
So you'll be there March 16th. That's a Thursday, is that correct?
That's a Thursday.
That is a Thursday.
Be there full day.
Okay, full day. And it's a Psychotherapy Networker Symposium in DC this year. Okay.
In DC this year. And Mark and I are excited because we're going to be doing a joint book signing together. So you can meet us afterwards and
immediately
talk with us.
after. That's
Let's do
right.
a book plug. You introduce your books right now.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
My book's Therapeutic Improvisation, How to Stop Winging It and Own It as a Therapist. And it is a mashup of how to be an artist as a therapist, how to read the changes so that your clients can read their changes so we can have a lot of fun.
And mine is The Performing Art of Therapy, Acting Insights and Techniques for Clinicians. And it includes all the kind of exercises I was talking about before, and a lot more than that too.
It's a great book, by the way, folks. And by the way, we hope to see not only veteran therapists, we want to see early career clinicians and grad students there, because we want to get you excited about the artistry while you know you're close to it.
Before you burn out. Yes.
Before you lose it.
And my book is still an idea in the mind of God, gents. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you. We're going to do it some more.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. This is fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are in social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.